The blood pooled beneath Clara Zimmerman's fingernails as she scrubbed the floor of the boarding house kitchen in Bismarck, Dakota Territory. Though it was only beet juice from preparing the evening meal in late September of 1881. Still, she scrubbed harder, watching the pink water swirl away as if she could wash away the past 3 years just as easily. The other women who worked at Mrs. Henderson's establishment chattered about the new ranch hands who had arrived in town, their voices bright with possibility, but Clara kept her head down and her thoughts to herself. She had learned the hard way that hope was a luxury she could no longer afford. The sun hung low over the Missouri River when she finally finished her duties, her hands raw and aching. She wrapped her shawl tighter around her thin frame and stepped out into the cooling evening air. At 23, she looked older than her years, the light gone from her green eyes, replaced by something harder and more brittle. The bruises had long since faded from her skin, but the ones on her soul remained fresh as yesterday's wounds. She had been walking toward the small room she rented above the general store when she heard the commotion near the livery stable. A horse had gotten spooked, rearing and bucking, its eyes rolling white with fear. Several men stood at a distance, shouting suggestions but none brave enough to approach the panicked animal. Clara stopped despite herself, watching as a tall figure moved slowly toward the frightened creature. The man was lean and broad-shouldered, wearing dusty trail clothes and a dark hat pulled low. He did not rush or shout. Instead, he kept his movements measured and deliberate, his hands visible and open. Clara found herself drawn closer, curious despite her better judgment. She could hear him now, speaking in low, soothing tones that she could not quite make out, his voice a gentle rumble that seemed to cut through the horse's panic. "Easy now," he murmured, each word soft as falling snow. "Nobody's going to hurt you. You're safe." The horse's ears twitched forward, and gradually its dancing hooves stilled. The man reached out slowly, his fingers barely brushing the animal's neck, then withdrew. He waited, patient as stone, before trying again. This time the horse allowed the touch, and the man's hand moved in gentle circles along its coat. Within minutes, the previously wild-eyed creature stood calm, nuzzling the man's shoulder. Clara felt something twist in her chest, an old ache she thought she had buried. She turned to leave before anyone noticed her watching, but her worn boot caught on a loose board and she stumbled, catching herself against a post with a sharp intake of breath. The man looked up, and even in the fading light she could see his eyes were a startling blue, the color of the sky just before full dark. For a moment, their gazes held and Clara felt exposed, as if those eyes could see straight through to all her broken pieces. "You all right, miss?" he asked, his voice carrying the same gentleness he had used with the horse. "Fine," Clara said quickly, too quickly, and hurried away before he could say anything else. Her heart hammered against her ribs and she pressed a hand to her chest as if she could calm it by force. She had sworn off men, sworn off the very idea of them after what happened in Kansas. After Thomas Rourke had seemed like a good man at first. They all did they not? He had courted her properly in Abilene, where she had worked as a seamstress. He had brought her flowers and spoken of building a future together. She had been just 20 when they married, full of dreams about the life they would share. The first time he hit her, he had apologized with tears in his eyes, swearing it would never happen again. But it did. Again and again, each time with less remorse, until the apologies stopped coming altogether. For 2 years she had endured, trapped by shame and fear, and the belief that somehow she deserved his rage. Then came the night he came home drunk and violent, and she had known with absolute certainty that if she stayed, he would kill her. She had waited until he passed out. taken what little money she had hidden away, and fled on the midnight train. When she heard months later that Thomas had been trampled by cattle during a stampede, she felt nothing but relief and the gnawing guilt that came with it. A good woman would have mourned. A good woman would have felt something other than gratitude that her husband was dead. Now in Bismarck, she had built a careful life of solitude. She worked, she kept to herself, and she made sure no man got close enough to see the damage written in her bones. It was safer this way. Lonelier, but safer. The next morning, Clara was carrying water from the well behind the boarding house when she saw him again. The man from the livery stable was standing in conversation with Mr. Henderson, who owned the boarding house along with his wife. Clara tried to duck inside before being noticed, but Mrs. Henderson called out to her, "Clara, dear, come here a moment." Clara had no choice but to set down her buckets and approach, keeping her eyes lowered. "This is Franklin Lawson," Mrs. Henderson said warmly. "He has just been hired as the new foreman at the Circle K Ranch. He will be taking his meals here while they prepare the foreman's cabin on the property. Clara helps me in the kitchen." "Madam," Franklin said, tipping his hat. His voice was as gentle as she remembered. "Pleased to make your acquaintance properly." Clara nodded slightly, still not meeting his eyes. "Sir." "I was just telling Mr. Lawson about your wonderful cooking," Mrs. Henderson continued. "Your biscuits are the best in the territory." "You are too kind," Clara murmured, wishing desperately to escape. Franklin shifted his weight, and Clara tensed reflexively at the movement, a response she could not control. When she dared a glance up, she saw something flicker across his face, concern perhaps, or recognition. He took a deliberate step back, creating more space between them. "I am sure anything will be an improvement over trail cooking," he said easily, as if he had not noticed her reaction. "I have been eating my own beans and hardtack for too long." Mrs. Henderson laughed. "Well, you are in for a treat then. Clara, I will need you to prepare extra for supper tonight. Mr. Lawson will be joining us this evening." Clara nodded and fled back to the kitchen, her hands shaking as she picked up the water buckets. Through the window, she watched Franklin mount a bay gelding with the same careful grace he had shown with the spooked horse. He settled into the saddle like he had been born there, gathering the reins with capable hands, hands that had gentled a frightened animal without force or anger, hands that had made no threatening move toward her even in greeting. Clara shook her head sharply. It did not matter. Good manners did not make a good man, and she was done being fooled by appearances. But that evening, as she helped serve dinner, she found herself acutely aware of Franklin's presence at the table. He sat with the other ranch hands and boarders, but there was something different about him. He did not talk over others or dominate the conversation. When one of the younger cowboys told a rambling story about breaking a particularly stubborn bronc, Franklin listened with genuine interest, asking questions that showed he was actually paying attention. "Pass the salt," one of the men said gruffly, not even looking at Clara. Before she could reach for it, Franklin had picked it up. "Here you go, Sam," he said, handing it over. Then, turning to Clara, "Those biscuits are every bit as good as advertised, Miss Zimmerman. Thank you for the fine meal." Several of the other men mumbled their agreement, as if suddenly remembering their manners. Clara felt heat rise to her cheeks and quickly retreated to the kitchen. Through the doorway, she could hear the conversation continue, Franklin's voice among them but never overpowering the others. Over the following weeks, a pattern developed. Franklin took his meals at the boarding house while working to get the ranch's operations running smoothly. The previous foreman had left things in disarray, and the owner, Mr. Kendrick, had hired Franklin based on his reputation for turning troubled ranches around. Clara learned these details despite her best efforts not to. Mrs. Henderson loved to talk while they worked in the kitchen, sharing all the town gossip. Franklin had come from Wyoming, where he had successfully managed a large cattle operation. He was 28, unmarried, and according to Mrs. Henderson's sources, had turned down several young ladies who had set their caps for him. "Such a polite young man," Mrs. Henderson said one morning as she kneaded bread dough, "and so gentle with the horses. Mr. Henderson says he has never seen anyone with such a way with animals. Even that mean old mare the Kendricks have been trying to break has calmed right down for him." Clara said nothing, focusing on chopping vegetables for the stew, but she had noticed it too. When Franklin arrived for meals, she would sometimes glimpse him through the window, the way he stroked his horse's neck before tying it up, the quiet words he murmured. There was patience in every gesture, a quality she had rarely seen in men. It meant nothing, she reminded herself. Thomas had been patient too, at first. One evening in late October, Clara was walking back from delivering preserves to a neighbor when she heard raised voices. Two men stumbled out of the saloon, clearly drunk and spoiling for a fight. She quickly crossed to the other side of the street, knowing better than to draw attention, but one of them spotted her. "Hey there, sweetheart," the man called, his words slurred. "Were you heading in such a hurry?" Clara kept walking, her heart beginning to race. She heard footsteps behind her and walked faster. "I am talking to you," the man said, anger creeping into his voice now. A hand grabbed her arm, spinning her around, and Clara went cold all over, her vision tunneling. For a moment she was back in Kansas, back in the small house where there was nowhere to run, and she could not breathe, could not think. "The lady does not seem interested in conversation," came a calm voice, and suddenly Franklin was there, his hand on the drunk man's wrist. "Why do not you head on home and sleep it off? This is none of your business," the drunk snarled, but his grip on Clara's arm loosened. Franklin's expression did not change, but there was steel beneath the quiet tone when he spoke. "I am making it my business. Let her go." The drunk must have seen something in Franklin's eyes that convinced him not to push further. He released Clara's arm and staggered back toward the saloon, muttering curses. His companion had already disappeared. Clara stood frozen, her breath coming in short gasps. She was dimly aware that Franklin had stepped back, giving her space, his hands visible and empty. "Miss Zimmerman," he said softly, "you are safe now. Can you look at me?" She forced herself to focus on his face. He was watching her with concern but making no move to come closer. "I am going to walk you home," he said. "But I will stay several steps behind you, all right, just to make sure nobody else bothers you." Clara managed a jerky nod. True to his word, Franklin kept his distance as she walked on trembling legs to the general store. When she reached the outside stairs that led to her room, she paused, finally finding her voice. "Thank you," she whispered, not turning around. "You are welcome, Miss Zimmerman. Good night." She climbed the stairs and did not look back, but she could feel him waiting there until she had safely closed and locked her door. Only then did she hear his footsteps fade away. That night, Clara lay awake for hours, staring at the ceiling. The memory of Franklin's careful distance, his gentle voice, kept circling through her mind. He had not touched her beyond that brief moment of removing the drunk's hand from her arm. He had not demanded thanks or expected anything in return. He had simply made sure she was safe and then left. It frightened her how much that small kindness had affected her. The next day, she was kneading dough in the kitchen when Franklin arrived early for the noon meal. Mrs. Henderson was out visiting a sick friend, leaving Clara alone. She tensed when she heard his footsteps, but he stopped in the doorway, not entering the kitchen. "Miss Zimmerman, I wanted to apologize if I overstepped last night," he said quietly. "I just wanted to make sure you got home safely." Clara's hands stilled in the dough. "You did not overstep," she said, her voice barely audible. "You helped me. I should have thanked you properly." No thanks needed. Any decent person would have done the same. But in Clara's experience, decent people were far rarer than Franklin seemed to think. She finally looked up and found him watching her with those steady blue eyes. He did not look away when she met his gaze, but there was no challenge in it, no demand. "I know something about being afraid," Franklin said quietly, his words surprising her. "About having reasons not to trust." Clara's throat tightened. She wanted to ask what he meant, wanted to know his story, but the words would not come. Instead, she simply nodded. Franklin nodded back. "If you ever need help with anything, I hope you will feel like you can ask, but I will not push. I just wanted you to know that." Then he tipped his hat and left the kitchen, settling at his usual seat in the dining room to wait for the meal. Clara stood there, her hands buried in dough, feeling something crack in the walls she had built around herself. Over the next few weeks, Clara found herself paying more attention to Franklin despite her best intentions. She noticed how he always thanked her for the meals, his gratitude genuine rather than perfunctory. She noticed how he intervened when one of the other boarders spoke dismissively to Mrs. Henderson, his rebuke gentle but firm. She noticed how he never raised his voice, even when one of the young ranch hands made a mistake that cost them half a day's work. Franklin just had him fix it and showed him the right way, Mrs. Henderson reported. No yelling, no anger. "Mr. Henderson says the boy learned more from that than any amount of hollering would have taught him." Clara wanted to dismiss it, to find the flaw, the crack that would reveal the darkness underneath. But as autumn deepened into early winter, Franklin remained exactly what he appeared to be: patient, kind, and gentle. One cold November morning, Clara was struggling to carry a heavy crate of supplies that had been delivered to the wrong door. She was trying to manage it alone, as she always did when Franklin appeared. "Let me help with that," he offered. "I can manage," Clara said automatically. "I am sure you can," Franklin agreed, "but there is no shame in accepting help when it is freely offered." Clara hesitated, then stepped back. Franklin lifted the crate easily, his movements controlled and careful. "Where would you like it?" "The pantry," Clara said. "Through the kitchen." She led the way, hyper-aware of his presence behind her. But when they reached the pantry, he simply set the crate down where she indicated and stepped back. "Anything else that needs moving?" he asked. Clara shook her head. "No, thank you. You are welcome." He started to leave, then paused. "Miss Zimmerman, there is a church social next week. Would you consider attending?" Mrs. Henderson mentioned she could use help with the food preparation, and I thought, well, it might be nice to have an outing. The careful way he phrased it, making it about Mrs. Henderson rather than himself, did not escape Clara's notice. He was giving her an excuse, a way to say yes without it being about him at all. "I will think about it," Clara said, surprising herself. Franklin smiled, and it transformed his whole face. "I hope you will come. Mrs. Henderson will be happy for the help." After he left, Clara stood in the kitchen, her heart beating faster. She had not been to a social gathering since leaving Kansas. The thought of being in a crowd, of people looking at her, asking questions, made her want to retreat to her room and never come out. But another part of her, a part she had thought Thomas had killed, whispered that maybe it was time to try. Just a small step. Just to help Mrs. Henderson, nothing more. When she told Mrs. Henderson she would help with the social, the older woman beamed. "Oh, how wonderful. It will do you good to get out, dear. You spend too much time alone." The week passed in a blur of preparation. Clara threw herself into baking and cooking, finding comfort in the familiar tasks. She tried not to think about the fact that Franklin would be at the social, that he would see her there. The evening of the social, Clara dressed in her best dress, a simple dark blue calico that she had made herself. It was modest and plain, but clean and neatly pressed. She looked at herself in the small mirror above her washstand and barely recognized the woman staring back. When had she become so pale, so drawn? The social was held in the church hall, a large room warmed by a pot-bellied stove and decorated with autumn leaves and pine boughs. Clara stayed close to Mrs. Henderson, helping arrange food on the long tables, trying to ignore the curious glances from some of the townspeople. She knew there was gossip about her, the quiet widow woman who kept to herself. Let them talk. She had survived worse than whispers. She was arranging biscuits on a platter when she felt someone approach. Without looking up, she knew it was Franklin. She had become attuned to his presence in a way that both frightened and intrigued her. "Everything looks wonderful," he said quietly. "You have been working hard." Mrs. Henderson did most of it, Clara deflected. "We both know that is not true." Clara finally looked up. Franklin was dressed in clean clothes, his dark hair neatly combed, his hat in his hands. He looked nervous, she realized with surprise. This confident, capable man was actually nervous. "Would you consider taking a walk with me?" he asked. "Just around the room so people see you are not just help but a guest. You deserve to enjoy the social too." Clara's first instinct was to refuse, but something in his expression stopped her. There was hope there, but also acceptance, as if he would understand whatever answer she gave. "All right," she heard herself say. "Just around the room." Franklin offered his arm, holding it loosely so she could easily pull away if she wished. Clara hesitated, then lightly rested her hand on his sleeve. The fabric was warm from his body heat, and she could feel the solid muscle beneath. But his arm did not tighten, did not trap her. He simply walked slowly, matching his longer stride to hers. They did not speak much as they circulated through the room. Franklin greeted people he knew, introducing Clara simply as Miss Zimmerman, never making assumptions or putting her on the spot. When they passed the musicians starting to tune up for dancing, Clara felt herself tense. "We do not have to stay for the dancing," Franklin said quietly, as if reading her thoughts. "We can leave whenever you are ready." But Clara found she was not ready to leave yet. For the first time in years, she felt almost normal, almost like the girl she had been before Thomas. It was terrifying and exhilarating all at once. "I would like to stay a bit longer," she said. "If that is all right." "That is more than all right." They found seats along the wall, watching as couples began to gather for the first dance. Clara watched the swirling skirts, the smiling faces, and felt a pang of longing for something she thought she had lost forever. "You dance, Miss Zimmerman?" Franklin asked. "I used to," Clara admitted. "Before." She had not meant to say that last word, but it slipped out. Franklin did not pry, though. He simply nodded. "Before can be a heavy thing to carry," he said softly. "I have some befores of my own." Clara looked at him in surprise. He was staring across the room, his expression distant. "My father had a terrible temper," Franklin said, his voice low enough that only she could hear. "He took it out on my mother, on me and my sisters. I was 12 when I realized I was getting big enough to stop him." Clara's breath caught. "Did you?" "I tried. It just made him worse. But it gave my mother time to get help, to get the sheriff involved. My father went to prison when I was 14. He died there a few years later." "I am sorry," Clara whispered. Franklin looked at her then, and the understanding in his eyes made her chest ache. "I tell you this so you know that I understand. I saw what my mother went through. I saw how long it took her to stop flinching at sudden movements, to believe she was safe. And I swore I would never raise my hand in anger, never use my strength to hurt or frighten." Tears burned Clara's eyes. She blinked them back fiercely. "How do you trust again? How do you know the difference between a good man and one who is just pretending?" I do not know if there is an easy answer to that, Franklin said honestly. But I think maybe you watch what a man does when he is angry, when things do not go his way. That is when the truth comes out. Clara thought about all the times she had seen Franklin over the past months. She had never seen him lose his temper, never seen him lash out. Even when things went wrong, he remained steady and calm. I was married, Clara said suddenly, the words tumbling out before she could stop them. In Kansas. My husband, he was not a good man. He hurt me many times. I ran away and then I heard he died. I should have mourned, but I was just relieved. What kind of person does that make me? A person who survived, Franklin said firmly. A person who was strong enough to leave. That takes more courage than most people ever have to show. A tear slipped down Clara's cheek. She wiped it away quickly, glancing around to make sure no one was watching them. Would you like to step outside for some air? Franklin asked gently. Clara nodded, grateful for the escape. They slipped out the side door into the cold November night. The stars were brilliant overhead, and Clara took a deep breath of the crisp air, trying to steady herself. I am sorry, she said. I did not mean to burden you with all of that. It is not a burden, Franklin said. I asked and you trusted me enough to answer. That is a gift, Miss Zimmerman, not a burden. They stood in silence for a moment, their breath forming white clouds in the cold air. Clara wrapped her shawl tighter around herself. May I ask you something? Franklin said. Yes. Your first name is Clara, is it not? Would you permit me to use it? And would you consider calling me Franklin instead of Mr. Lawson? I would like to think we are becoming friends. Friends. The word felt foreign and precious at the same time. I would like that, Franklin. Clara. He said her name softly, testing it. It suits you. They stayed outside a while longer, talking quietly about safer subjects. Franklin told her about growing up in Missouri, about learning to work with horses from an old cowboy who had been kind to him when his father was at his worst. Clara found herself telling him about her childhood in Illinois, about her mother who had taught her to sew and cook, about the little brother who had died of fever when she was 10. When they finally went back inside, something had shifted between them. It was subtle, but Clara felt it, a tentative connection forming like the first green shoots after a long winter. Over the following weeks, that connection deepened. Franklin began finding small excuses to see Clara beyond mealtimes. He would bring Mrs. Henderson messages from the ranch, but would arrive at times when he knew Clara would be there. They would talk while she worked, and slowly, gradually, Clara began to relax around him. He learned that she loved reading but rarely had access to books. The next week, he brought her a worn copy of Shakespeare's sonnets, apologizing that it was not in better condition. It was my mother's, he said. She loved to read, and she made sure we all learned despite my father's objections. I thought you might enjoy it. Clara held the book like it was made of gold. I cannot accept this. It is too precious. It is meant to be read, not sit on a shelf in my cabin. Please, I would like you to have it. She accepted the book and spent her evenings reading by lamplight, the beautiful words washing over her like a balm. Some of the love sonnets made her ache with longing for something she had thought forever lost to her. December brought snow to Bismarck, blanketing the town in white. Clara was walking to the boarding house one morning, carefully navigating the icy boardwalk when her foot slipped. She would have fallen hard if strong hands had not caught her, steadying her. I have got you, Franklin's voice said in her ear. For just a moment, Clara allowed herself to lean into that strength to feel safe. Then reality crashed back and she pulled away, her heart racing. Thank you, she managed. Franklin studied her face, his expression concerned. Are you hurt? No, just startled. He did not release her immediately, waiting until he was sure she had her balance, but his hold was gentle, nothing like the bruising grip she had known. When he did let go, Clara felt the absence of his warmth. "The walks are treacherous," Franklin said. "May I walk with you to make sure you arrive safely?" They walked in companionable silence, Franklin adjusting his pace to match hers. When they arrived at the boarding house, he paused. "Clara, Christmas is next week. I was wondering, that is, I wanted to ask if you would consider having dinner with me, somewhere other than the boarding house. There is a decent restaurant that has opened near the hotel." Clara's stomach fluttered with nervousness. A private dinner was different from the social gatherings at the boarding house. It was intimate, intentional. It was a courtship. "I do not know," she said hesitantly. "I am not sure I am ready for that." "That is all right," Franklin said, though she could see the disappointment in his eyes. "I understand. But Clara, I want you to know that I care about you. I am not asking you to be sure of anything right now. I am just asking for the chance to spend some time with you, to let whatever is growing between us have room to breathe. If you decide you are not interested, I will respect that." "But I had to ask." Clara looked up at him, this patient, gentle man who had somehow slipped past her defenses. "Let me think about it. Take all the time you need." But as Clara worked through the day, she found her mind returning again and again to Franklin's invitation. She was terrified. There was no denying that. The thought of opening her heart again, of making herself vulnerable, filled her with dread. But she was also tired. Tired of being alone, tired of being afraid, tired of letting Thomas's cruelty define the rest of her life. That evening she found Franklin tending to his horse at the livery stable. She watched for a moment as his capable hands moved over the animal's coat with a currying brush, his movements rhythmic and soothing. "Franklin," she called softly. He turned, surprise and pleasure crossing his face. "Clara, is everything all right? I have been thinking about your invitation," she said, stepping closer. "For Christmas dinner." Franklin set down the brush, giving her his full attention. "And I would like to accept, if the offer still stands." The smile that spread across Franklin's face was radiant. "The offer definitely still stands. Thank you, Clara. I promise I will do everything I can to make sure you feel comfortable." "I know you will," Clara said, and realized with a start that she meant it. She trusted Franklin, at least as much as she was capable of trusting any man. Christmas Day dawned clear and cold. Clara spent extra time getting ready, choosing a dress in deep green that brought out the color of her eyes. She pinned her dark hair up carefully and even dabbed a bit of rose water on her wrists, feeling both foolish and hopeful. Franklin arrived promptly at the appointed time, looking handsome in a dark suit. He offered her his arm, and this time Clara took it without hesitation. The restaurant was warm and decorated with evergreen boughs and red ribbons. Franklin had reserved a table in a quieter corner, away from the main crowd. He held Clara's chair for her, then settled across from her, his eyes warm. "You look beautiful," he said simply. Clara felt heat rise to her cheeks. "Thank you. You look very nice as well." They ordered their meals, and as they waited, they talked. Franklin told her about Christmases past, about his mother's determination to make the day special despite his father's rages. Clara found herself sharing memories of happier times before Thomas, when Christmas had meant family and joy. "You have family still in Illinois?" Franklin asked. Clara shook her head. "My parents passed some years ago. I have a married sister in St. Louis, but we lost touch after I married Thomas. I was too ashamed to write to her, to tell her what my life had become." "It is not too late to reach out," Franklin said gently. "If you wanted to." "Maybe," Clara said. But the thought of reconnecting with her sister, of having family again, planted itself in her heart. The food arrived, and it was delicious, but Clara barely tasted it. She was too aware of Franklin across from her, the way the lamplight played across his features, the warmth in his eyes when he looked at her. After dinner, Franklin walked her home through the snow-covered streets. The town was quiet, most families celebrating indoors. When they reached the stairs to Clara's room, she paused. "Thank you for a lovely evening," she said. "The pleasure was entirely mine," Franklin replied. He hesitated, then reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away. When she did not, he gently took her hand in his. "Clara, I want to court you properly. I know you have been hurt, and I know you need time. I am willing to wait, to go as slowly as you need, but I want you to know my intentions are serious." Clara's heart pounded. She looked down at their joined hands, his large and calloused from work, hers small and work-worn. "I am broken, Franklin," she whispered. "I do not know if I can be what you need." Franklin's other hand came up to gently cup her cheek, tilting her face up to meet his gaze. "You are not broken," he said firmly. "You are healing, and that is different. And Clara, all I need is the chance to prove to you that not all men are like the one who hurt you. I want to prove that you can trust me, that you are safe with me." Tears spilled down Clara's cheeks. "I want to believe that. Then let me show you. One day at a time, one moment at a time. No pressure, no expectations. Just let me be here for you." Clara nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. Franklin brushed away her tears with his thumb, his touch impossibly gentle. "May I kiss your hand?" he asked softly. Clara nodded again. Franklin lifted her hand to his lips, pressing a tender kiss to her knuckles, his eyes never leaving hers. It was chaste and respectful, but Clara felt the warmth of it spread through her entire body. "Merry Christmas, Clara," he said. "Merry Christmas, Franklin." That night, Clara lay in bed, her hand pressed to her chest where her heart still raced. For the first time in years, the future did not seem like something to endure, but something that might hold promise. Over the winter months, Franklin courted Clara with a patience and gentleness that slowly, inexorably wore down her defenses. He never pushed, never demanded more than she was ready to give. He brought her small gifts, flowers when he could find them, a pretty ribbon for her hair. He took her on walks when the weather permitted, always keeping a respectful distance unless she chose to close it. More importantly, he talked to her, really talked. He shared his dreams of one day owning his own ranch, his hopes of building something lasting. He spoke of his mother, who had eventually remarried a kind man and was now living happily in Missouri. He told her his fears too, his worry that he might have inherited his father's temper despite all his efforts to be different. "You are nothing like your father," Clara told him fiercely one February afternoon as they walked along the frozen river. "You are good and kind, Franklin. I have seen you angry and you did not lash out or hurt anyone." "You have seen me angry?" Franklin asked in surprise. "Last week when that drunk cowboy kicked his horse, I saw your face. You were furious." Franklin was quiet for a moment. "I was. That kind of cruelty makes me sick." "But you did not hit him. You took the horse away and found it a better home, and you made sure the cowboy was banned from owning animals. You handled it with justice, not violence." Franklin stopped walking and turned to face her. "You were watching." Clara felt heat rise to her cheeks despite the cold. "I noticed things about you." "I noticed things about you too," Franklin said softly. "Like how you have started smiling more, how you do not flinch as much when someone moves quickly, how beautiful you are when you laugh." Clara's breath caught. Franklin reached out slowly and took her gloved hands in his. "I am falling in love with you, Clara Zimmerman," he said quietly. "I know it is too soon to say it, and I am not asking you to say it back, but I wanted you to know. I wanted to be honest with you." Clara's eyes filled with tears. "I am afraid," she whispered. "I know. But Clara, what if being afraid is not a reason to run away but a reason to be brave? What if you let yourself feel what you are feeling and we face the fear together? What if I am too broken?" Clara asked, the question that had haunted her for so long finally spoken aloud. "What if I can never be whole again?" Franklin pulled her gently into his arms, giving her every opportunity to pull away. When she did not, when she instead buried her face against his chest, he held her carefully as if she were something precious. "Then we will be broken together," he murmured against her hair. "And maybe, just maybe, we will help each other heal." Clara clung to him, breathing in the scent of leather and soap and something uniquely Franklin. In his arms, she felt safe in a way she had never felt with Thomas. This was not possession or control. This was shelter and warmth freely offered. "I think I am falling in love with you too," she whispered. "It terrifies me." Franklin's arms tightened just slightly. "We will take it slow as you need." They stood there in the winter cold, holding each other, and Clara felt something shift deep inside her. The walls she had built were not crumbling all at once, but they were developing cracks, letting light filter through. Spring came to Dakota Territory with dramatic suddenness. The snow melted, the river swelled, and the prairie burst into life. Clara found herself helping Mrs. Henderson plant a garden, her hands in the earth, the sun warm on her back. Franklin stopped by while she was working, leaning on the fence to watch. "You have dirt on your nose," he said with a grin. Clara laughed and wiped at her face, probably making it worse. "I am sure I look a fright." "You look happy," Franklin said. "That is the most beautiful thing I have ever seen." Mrs. Henderson, who was working nearby, made a pleased sound. She had been quietly encouraging the romance, leaving Clara and Franklin alone together whenever possible, making sure Clara had nice dresses to wear when Franklin took her out. "Franklin, why do you not stay for lunch?" Mrs. Henderson called. "We could use a strong back to move some things in the cellar afterward." "I would be happy to help," Franklin agreed, his eyes never leaving Clara. These domestic moments became the fabric of their courtship. Franklin would help with repairs around the boarding house, and Clara would bring him lemonade and cookies. They would sit on the porch in the evenings, talking and watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant colors. Franklin would reach for her hand, and Clara would let him, marveling at how something so simple could feel so profound. In May, Franklin told Clara that the foreman's cabin was finally ready. He would be moving out of the boarding house and onto the ranch property full-time. "It is only a few miles," he assured her when he saw her face fall. "And I will still come to town regularly. Plus, I was hoping you might come visit sometime, see the ranch, meet some of the horses." "I would like that," Clara said. The following Sunday, Franklin drove into town with a wagon and took Clara out to the Circle K ranch. The ranch was sprawling and beautiful, with good grazing land and a solid house and outbuildings. The foreman's cabin was smaller but well built, with a stone fireplace and real glass windows. "It is not much yet," Franklin said as he showed her around, "but I have been fixing it up. I want it to be a real home someday." The way he said it, looking at her with such hope in his eyes, made Clara's heart race. He was talking about the future, a future that included her. "Show me the horses," she asked, changing the subject before the emotion overwhelmed her. Franklin's face lit up. He took her to the corrals where several horses were grazing. He introduced her to each one, telling her their names and personalities. Then he led her to a smaller paddock where a beautiful chestnut mare stood. "This is Rosie," Franklin said. "She was mistreated by her previous owner. Mr. Kendrick bought her cheap because nobody else wanted to take the time to work with her, but she has come a long way." Clara watched as Franklin entered the paddock. Rosie's ears swiveled toward him and she walked over calmly, nuzzling his shoulder. "Would you like to try?" Franklin asked. "I do not know anything about horses," Clara said nervously. I will teach you. Come here." Clara entered the paddock on shaking legs. Franklin positioned himself beside her, his hand on the small of her back, reassuring and warm. "Hold out your hand, palm flat," he instructed. "Let her smell you, get to know you." Clara did as he said, holding her breath as the horse's soft nose snuffled at her hand. Then Rosie blew out a gentle breath and allowed Clara to stroke her neck. "She likes you," Franklin said, pleasure evident in his voice. Clara felt a surge of accomplishment. "She is beautiful." "She is yours if you want her." Clara turned to stare at Franklin. "What?" "I have been working with her, thinking about you. She needs someone patient and gentle, someone who understands what it is like to be afraid. I thought maybe you two might be good for each other." Clara's eyes filled with tears. "Franklin, I cannot accept a horse. That is too much." "Why is it too much?" Franklin asked gently. "Clara, I want to give you things. I want to make you happy. Please let me do this." Clara looked back at Rosie, who was watching her with liquid brown eyes. Something about the mare's gentle presence spoke to her. "I have never owned a horse before," Clara said. "Then it is time you did. And I will teach you to ride if you want to learn." Over the following weeks, Clara visited the ranch regularly, spending time with Rosie and learning to ride. Franklin was an excellent teacher, patient and encouraging. He taught her how to saddle and bridle the mare, how to sit properly, how to communicate with gentle pressure rather than force. "It is about trust," Franklin explained as Clara took her first tentative rides around the corral. "Rosie has to trust that you will not hurt her, and you have to trust that she will take care of you. It is a partnership." Clara understood the metaphor he was drawing, the parallel to their own relationship. She and Franklin were learning to trust each other, building a partnership based on mutual respect and care. One afternoon in June, Franklin suggested they ride out to see a meadow he had found on the ranch property. Clara, now comfortable enough in the saddle for short rides, agreed. They rode out together, Rosie moving smoothly beneath Clara, Franklin on his gelding beside her. The meadow was breathtaking, full of wildflowers in every color. Franklin helped Clara dismount, and they let the horses graze while they sat in the grass. "This is beautiful," Clara said, looking around in wonder. "I wanted to share it with you," Franklin said. "Clara, there is something I need to ask you, and I want you to know there is no pressure. You can say no, and nothing will change between us." Clara's heart began to pound. "All right." Franklin took her hand, his thumb stroking over her knuckles. "I love you. I love you more than I thought it was possible to love someone. You are the first thing I think about when I wake up and the last thing on my mind before I sleep. You have made me happier than I have ever been." "Franklin," Clara breathed. "I want to marry you, Clara. I want to build a life with you, here on this ranch or wherever else you want to be. I want to wake up beside you every morning and fall asleep holding you every night. But more than that, I want to spend my life proving to you that you are loved, that you are cherished, that you are safe." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a simple gold ring. "This was my grandmother's. My mother sent it to me when I told her about you. She wanted you to have it, to know that you are already part of the family. Clara Zimmerman, will you marry me?" Clara looked at the ring, then at Franklin's face, open and hopeful and full of love. She thought about the journey that had brought her here, from the nightmare of her marriage to Thomas, to this beautiful moment in a flower-filled meadow. She thought about all the ways Franklin had shown her that love did not have to hurt, that gentleness was not weakness but strength. "I am still afraid sometimes," she said softly. "I know. I will probably always be a little afraid too, but Clara, I would rather face the fear with you than be safe and alone without you." Clara felt the last of her walls crumble. She had spent so long thinking she was too broken for love, too damaged to deserve happiness. But Franklin had proven her wrong with his gentle hands and patient heart. He had shown her that healing was possible, that she could be more than what Thomas had tried to make her. "Yes," she said, her voice growing stronger. "Yes, Franklin, I will marry you." Franklin's whoop of joy startled the horses and sent birds flying from the nearby trees. He swept Clara into his arms, spinning her around, and when he set her down, he cupped her face in his hands. "May I kiss you?" he asked, his voice rough with emotion. "Please," Clara whispered. Franklin kissed her with a tenderness that made her heart ache. It was nothing like the rough, demanding kisses Thomas had taken. This was a gift, freely given and received. Clara's hands came up to rest on Franklin's chest, feeling his heart pounding as fast as her own. When they finally pulled apart, both were breathing hard, their foreheads resting together. "I love you," Clara said, the words coming easily now. "I love you so much, Franklin." "I love you too, Clara. I promise I will spend every day proving it to you." He slipped the ring onto her finger and Clara held up her hand, watching the gold catch the sunlight. She was engaged. She was going to marry Franklin Lawson, and this time it would be different. This time it would be right. They rode back to the ranch in the golden light of late afternoon, talking about their plans. Franklin wanted to get married soon, but he was willing to wait as long as Clara needed. She surprised herself by saying she did not want to wait long either. "Why wait?" she said. "I want to start our life together. I want to be your wife. Then we will have Mrs. Henderson help you plan whatever kind of wedding you want," Franklin said. "Anything you want, Clara, you just say the word." In the end, Clara wanted something simple. She and Franklin were married in late July in the small church in Bismarck. Mrs. Henderson stood as Clara's witness, tears streaming down her face throughout the ceremony. Several of the ranch hands came, along with townspeople who had gotten to know Clara over the past year. Clara wore a new dress she had made herself, cream-colored with delicate lace at the collar and cuffs. Franklin wore his best suit and looked at her like she was the most precious thing in the world. When the minister asked if there were any objections, Clara held her breath, some irrational part of her expecting Thomas to appear to claim her, to drag her back. But of course, he did not. Thomas was dead and she was free. She was marrying a good man who loved her, and she was choosing him, choosing a future full of hope. "I do," Franklin said when asked if he took Clara as his wife, his voice strong and sure. "I do," Clara echoed, meaning it with her whole heart. When Franklin kissed her as her husband for the first time, Clara felt something she had thought lost forever. Joy. Pure, uncomplicated joy. The wedding celebration was held at the boarding house, with food and music and dancing. Clara danced with Franklin, letting him lead her around the floor, trusting him to keep her safe. She laughed when he spun her, delighted when he pulled her close. "Happy?" he asked, his breath warm against her ear. "So happy," Clara confirmed. "Happier than I ever thought I could be." As evening fell, Franklin drove them to the ranch in a wagon decorated with ribbons and bells. The cabin was lit with lamplight, warm and welcoming. Franklin carried Clara over the threshold, and she laughed at the traditional gesture. He set her down gently and then just stood there looking at her. "I want you to know that we do not have to do anything you are not ready for," he said quietly. "I am content just to hold you, to sleep beside you. There is no rush." Clara's heart swelled with love for this man. "I want to be your wife in every way," she said. "I trust you, Franklin." That first night as husband and wife, Franklin proved again his gentleness and patience. He made love to her as if she were something precious, checking in with her, making sure she was comfortable, putting her pleasure before his own. It was nothing like the cold, selfish acts Thomas had demanded. This was intimacy built on love and trust, and afterward, Clara cried tears of release and healing. Franklin held her, stroking her hair, murmuring words of love and reassurance. "You are safe, Clara. You will always be safe with me." "I know," Clara said, and she did know, bone deep and certain. "I love you, Franklin Lawson." "I love you too, Clara Lawson." Clara smiled at the sound of her new name. She was Clara Lawson now, wife of Franklin, beginning a new chapter of her life. The first months of marriage were an adjustment, but a joyful one. Clara moved into the cabin and set about making it a home. She sewed curtains and quilts, planted a garden, and learned the rhythms of ranch life. Franklin taught her more about horses, and Clara found she had a real talent for it. The damaged animals responded to her gentle touch, perhaps sensing in her a kindred spirit. Franklin continued to surprise Clara with his thoughtfulness. When he learned she missed having a piano like she had played as a child, he saved for months and had one shipped from St. Louis. When he discovered she had always wanted to learn to read music better, he arranged for lessons from a woman in town. "You do too much for me," Clara protested after the piano arrived. "I do what makes my wife happy," Franklin replied. "And seeing you play, seeing that look of peace on your face, that is worth any amount of money." Clara also reconnected with her sister, writing a long letter that explained everything that had happened with Thomas and everything that had changed since meeting Franklin. Her sister, Margaret, wrote back immediately, full of joy and relief that Clara was alive and well. They began corresponding regularly, and Margaret promised to visit once she could arrange travel. As autumn came again, nearly a year since Clara had first seen Franklin gentle that frightened horse, she realized she had not had a nightmare about Thomas in weeks. The memories were still there, but they had less power over her. Franklin's love had given her the strength to heal, to reclaim the parts of herself that Thomas had tried to destroy. One October evening, Clara was preparing supper when Franklin came in from working with the horses. He washed up and then came to stand behind her, his arms wrapping around her waist, his chin resting on her shoulder. "I have news," he said, and she could hear the excitement in his voice. "What is it?" "Mr. Kendrick wants to retire. He has offered to sell me the ranch with very favorable terms. Clara, we could own this place, build something permanent." Clara turned in his arms, looking up at him. "Is that what you want?" "Only if it is what you want too. This is our life, our future. I want us to decide together." Clara thought about it. The ranch had become home to her, this cabin, this land. She could see a future here, raising horses, building something good. "Yes," she said, "let's do it." Franklin kissed her, long and deep. "We are going to build something wonderful, Clara, I can feel it." And they did. Over the next years, Franklin and Clara transformed the Circle K into one of the most respected horse ranches in Dakota Territory. They specialized in taking damaged or mistreated horses and rehabilitating them. Clara's gentle touch combined with Franklin's expertise creating miracles. Their happiness was completed when Clara discovered she was expecting a child in the spring of 1883. Franklin was overjoyed but also worried. "Are you happy about this?" he asked. "I know your marriage to Thomas. I know it might bring up difficult memories." "I am happy," Clara assured him. "This is different. This child was created in love, and it will be raised by parents who love each other and will love it fiercely. That is everything Thomas was not." Their son was born on a warm May morning, after a labor that left Clara exhausted but exhilarated. Franklin had stayed by her side the entire time, holding her hand, encouraging her. "He is perfect," Franklin said, cradling the tiny bundle carefully. "Clara, you are amazing. You did so well." They named him James after Franklin's grandfather. James Lawson was a healthy, happy baby who had his father's blue eyes and his mother's dark hair. Franklin was a devoted father, walking the floor with James when he cried, changing diapers without complaint, marveling at every little milestone. "I want to be the father mine never was," Franklin told Clara one night as they watched their sleeping son. "I want James to grow up knowing he is loved, knowing he is safe." "He will," Clara said. "You are already an incredible father, Franklin." 2 years later, their daughter was born, a tiny girl they named Rose, after the horse that had been Clara's first step back to trusting. Rose was as spirited as her namesake, keeping her parents on their toes. Clara's sister Margaret came to visit when Rose was 6 months old, bringing her own children to meet their cousins. The sisters wept when they saw each other, so much time lost but a future of friendship ahead of them. "You look so different," Margaret said, studying Clara. "You look happy." "Truly happy." "I am," Clara said simply. "Franklin gave me back my life." Margaret met Franklin and immediately understood what Clara saw in him. "He is a good man," she told Clara privately. "Nothing like Thomas. I am so glad you found him." The years passed in a blur of happiness. The ranch prospered, James and Rose grew, and Franklin and Clara's love deepened with each passing season. They had their challenges, as all couples do, but they faced them together. When Clara struggled with dark memories, Franklin held her. When Franklin worried he was not doing enough, Clara reassured him. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Franklin took Clara back to the meadow where he had proposed. The children were with Mrs. Henderson for the day, giving the couple time alone. "You remember this place?" Franklin asked as they stood among the wildflowers. "How could I forget? This is where my life really began." Franklin took both her hands in his. "Clara Lawson, you have given me 10 years of happiness I did not know was possible. You have given me 2 beautiful children, a home full of love, and a purpose beyond what I dreamed. I love you more today than I did the day I married you, and I will love you more tomorrow than I do today." Clara's eyes filled with happy tears. "You saved me, Franklin. When I thought I was too broken for any man, you proved me wrong with your gentle hands and your patient heart. You showed me that love does not have to hurt, that I deserve to be happy. I love you with everything I am." They kissed there in the meadow, surrounded by wildflowers and the wide Dakota sky, 2 people who had found healing and hope in each other. As the years continued to pass, James grew into a kind, responsible young man who had inherited his father's way with horses. Rose was fierce and intelligent, determined to prove she could do anything her brother could do. Franklin and Clara watched them grow with pride and joy. When James was 16 and Rose was 14, Clara gave birth to twins, 2 boys they named Samuel and Thomas. Franklin had been hesitant about using the name Thomas, but Clara had insisted. "That name does not belong to him anymore," she said firmly. "I am taking it back, giving it to our son, filling it with love instead of pain. Thomas Lawson will grow up knowing only kindness and gentleness." "That is how we win." Franklin had kissed her forehead. "You are the bravest person I have ever known." The twins brought new energy to the household, keeping everyone busy. James helped with their care, proving himself responsible and patient. Rose declared them the best brothers anyone could ask for and took her role as big sister seriously. As Clara approached her 40th birthday, she sometimes looked back on the frightened, broken woman she had been when she first came to Bismarck. That woman seemed like a stranger now. Franklin's love had not erased the past, but it had given her the strength to integrate it, to accept what had happened without letting it define her. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset while their children played in the yard, Franklin reached for Clara's hand. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. "How lucky I am," Clara said. "How close I came to missing all of this because I was too afraid to try." "I am the lucky one," Franklin countered. "You took a chance on me when you had every reason not to trust. You gave me your heart when you thought it was too broken to give. Clara, You are the strongest person I know." "We are strong together," Clara said. "That is what makes it work." Franklin pulled her closer, and Clara rested her head on his shoulder, watching their children play. James was pushing the twins on a rope swing Franklin had hung from the old oak tree. Rose was attempting to teach their dog a new trick. The scene was so perfectly domestic, so beautifully normal, that Clara felt her throat tighten with emotion. This was what she had fought for when she fled from Thomas. This was what she had dared to hope for when she accepted Franklin's courtship. This life, full of love and laughter and the everyday magic of a family built on trust and respect. When Margaret visited the following summer with her family, now including grandchildren, the ranch was full of life and noise. Clara and Margaret sat on the porch one afternoon, watching all the children play together. "You have built something beautiful here," Margaret said. "I am so proud of you, Clara." "I could not have done it without Franklin," Clara said. "He believed in me when I did not believe in myself. He is a good man, but you are a good woman. You both deserve this happiness." As the years moved toward 1900, the ranch continued to thrive. Franklin had trained James to take over more of the daily operations, preparing him to eventually run the ranch himself. Rose had surprised everyone by declaring her intention to become a veterinarian, studying every book on animal medicine she could get her hands and apprenticing with the local animal doctor. The twins were growing into fine young men, different as night and day but equally beloved. On the eve of the new century, Franklin and Clara hosted a large party at the ranch. Friends and family came from miles around to celebrate. As midnight approached, Franklin called for everyone's attention. "I want to make a toast," he said, raising his glass. "To my wife, Clara, who has been my partner, my love, and my best friend for 18 years. To our children, who make us proud every single day. And to the future, whatever it may bring. May we face it together with love and courage." Everyone raised their glasses, voices calling out in agreement. Clara felt Franklin's arm around her waist, solid and warm. She looked around at the gathered crowd, at the life they had built, and felt overwhelming gratitude. After the party ended and the guests had departed, Franklin and Clara stood on the porch, watching the first sunrise of the new century paint the sky in brilliant shades of pink and gold. "A new century," Franklin mused. "Hard to believe." "We have seen a lot of change," Clara agreed. "And I imagine we will see a lot more." "Whatever comes, we will handle it," Franklin said confidently. "We have made it this far." Clara turned to face her husband. He was 50 now, silver threading through his dark hair, lines around his eyes from years of smiling and squinting into the sun. He was as handsome to her as the day they met, perhaps more so because she knew the goodness that lay beneath the surface. "Franklin Lawson, I love you," she said. "Clara Lawson, I love you too," he replied, pulling her close. "You are still the best thing that ever happened to me." They kissed as the sun rose on a new century. Two people who had found each other when both needed saving, who had built a love strong enough to weather any storm. The years that followed brought their share of joys and sorrows. Mrs. Henderson passed away peacefully in her sleep, leaving Clara bereft at the loss of the woman who had been like a mother to her. James married a kind young woman named Sarah and gave Franklin and Clara their first grandchildren. Rose did indeed become a veterinarian, one of the first women in the region to do so, and brought her skills back to the ranch. The twins grew and eventually struck out to make their own ways in the world, though they always came home for holidays. Through it all, Franklin and Clara remained each other's anchor. They still rode out to the meadow on special occasions, still held hands like newlyweds, still looked at each other with love and wonder. On their 30th wedding anniversary in 1913, Franklin was 61 and Clara was 54. Their children had organized a surprise party, gathering everyone the couple had ever cared about. 30 years, Franklin said in his speech, his arm around Clara. 30 years of waking up beside the woman I love. 30 years of building a life together. Clara, you have made every single day better just by being in it. I would not trade a moment of our life together for anything. Clara stood to add her own words, something she would have been too shy to do in the early years of their marriage. When I met Franklin, I was convinced I was too broken to ever be loved again, she said, her voice carrying across the gathered crowd. I had been hurt so badly that I thought the best I could hope for was to survive, but Franklin showed me I was wrong. With his gentle hands and his patient heart, he proved that I was not broken beyond repair. He proved that love could heal, that trust could be rebuilt, that happiness was possible. He gave me a life beyond my wildest dreams, and I am grateful every single day that he did not give up on me. There was not a dry eye in the room when she finished. Franklin pulled her close and kissed her forehead, whispering words meant only for her. You saved me too, Clara. You gave me a purpose and a family and a love I never thought I would find. You are my everything. As they danced together that night, surrounded by children and grandchildren and friends, Clara reflected on the long journey that had brought her to this moment. From the terrified woman scrubbing floors in a boarding house to this confident matriarch of a loving family, the transformation still sometimes surprised her. But she had learned that healing was not a destination but a journey. There were still nights when nightmares came, still moments when an unexpected sound or gesture would trigger old fears. But Franklin was always there, ready to hold her, to remind her that she was safe, that she was loved. And Clara had learned to be there for Franklin too, supporting him through his own struggles and doubts. Their marriage was not perfect, but it was real and honest and built on a foundation of mutual respect and deep, abiding love. As they grew older, they slowed down but never stopped. Franklin still worked with horses, though now he mostly supervised while James and the younger men did the heavy lifting. Clara still tended her garden and her grandchildren, passing on the lessons she had learned about strength and survival. One spring evening, when Franklin was 70 and Clara was 63, they sat on the porch watching the sunset, a ritual that had become sacred over the years. You ever regret it? Clara asked suddenly. Franklin looked at her in surprise. Regret what? Marrying me. Taking on all my baggage, all my brokenness. Franklin was quiet for a long moment, and Clara felt a flutter of anxiety. Then he took her hand, his thumb tracing the familiar pattern over her knuckles that had become his signature gesture over the years. Clara, marrying you was the best decision I ever made, he said firmly. You were never a burden. You were a gift. Yes, you had been hurt, but that hurt made you who you are, compassionate, strong, resilient. I have loved every moment of our life together, even the hard ones. Especially the hard ones, because they showed me what we are made of. Tears slipped down Clara's cheeks. Even after all these years, Franklin could still make her cry with his kindness. I love you so much, she whispered. I love you too, Clara, until my last breath and beyond. They sat in comfortable silence as the sun set, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple and gold. The ranch around them was quiet, peaceful. Their grandchildren's laughter drifted from the barn where they were playing. This was happiness, Clara thought. Not the absence of pain or fear, but the presence of love strong enough to weather both. She had learned that being broken was not the end of her story, but the beginning of a new chapter. Franklin had proven to her that gentle hands could heal, that patient love could restore, that trust could be rebuilt piece by careful piece. She thought of the woman she had been that day at the boarding house, scrubbing beet juice from the floor and believing herself beyond redemption. If she could go back and tell that woman what the future held, would she even believe it? A loving husband, beautiful children, a successful ranch, a life full of purpose and joy, probably not. But she did not need to go back. She was here now, living the life that woman had been too afraid to hope for. And it was more than she had ever dreamed possible. As the stars began to emerge in the darkening sky, Franklin squeezed her hand. "Come to bed," he asked softly. "In a minute," Clara said. "I just want to sit here a little longer and count my blessings." Franklin smiled and dropped a kiss on the top of her head. "I will wait for you inside." He stood and headed into the house, his steps slower than they once were but still steady. Clara remained on the porch, looking out at the land they had built their life on, at the home they had filled with love. She thought about all the people who had touched her life. Mrs. Henderson, who had given her work when she needed it. Margaret, who had welcomed her back with open arms. The children who had taught her that she was capable of being a good mother despite her fears. And most of all, Franklin, who had seen past her damage to the woman underneath, who had loved her with a patience and gentleness that had slowly, inexorably healed her wounded heart. The cowboy had proved her wrong, and she had never been more grateful to be wrong about anything in her life. She was not too broken for love. She had just been waiting for the right person to love her, someone who understood that broken things could be mended, that scars did not diminish beauty, that the heart's capacity for love was infinite if given the chance to bloom. Clara stood and walked into the house, closing the door on the night and heading toward the bedroom where Franklin waited. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new joys, new moments to treasure. But tonight, she would sleep in the arms of the man who had taught her that love could be gentle, that safety could be real, that happy endings were possible even for the broken. She had whispered once that she was too broken for any man. Franklin had proved her wrong with gentle hands and a patient heart, and in doing so, had given her a life more beautiful than she had ever imagined. And for that, she would be grateful for all her remaining days, however many or few they might be. The story of Clara and Franklin Lawson was one of healing and hope, of love that conquered fear, of two damaged souls finding wholeness in each other. It was a testament to the power of gentleness in a harsh world, of patience in the face of pain, of choosing to believe in second chances even when the first chance had gone so terribly wrong. And as Clara climbed into bed beside her husband of so many years, feeling his arms wrap around her in the familiar embrace that still made her feel safe, she knew that this was the happy ending she had never dared to dream of. Not because it was perfect, but because it was real, built on a foundation of trust and respect and a love that had proven itself time and time again. "Good night, my love," Franklin murmured against her hair. "Good night," Clara replied, settling into his warmth. "Thank you." "For what?" "For everything. For proving me wrong. For showing me what love should be. For giving me this beautiful life." Franklin's arms tightened just slightly. "Thank you for trusting me enough to let me try. You are the bravest person I have ever known, Clara Lawson." They fell asleep that way, as they had for 39 years. Two people who had found in each other exactly what they needed most: acceptance, understanding, and a love gentle enough to heal even the deepest wounds. The cowboy and the broken woman who had discovered together that neither of them had to face the world alone anymore. And in the morning, they would wake up together and face another day, grateful for each moment they had been given, knowing that whatever challenges came, they would meet them together just as they always had. Because that was what love did. It healed, it strengthened, it endured. Clara Zimmerman had thought she was too broken for any man. Franklin Lawson had proved her wrong with gentle hands and a heart full of patient love. And together, They had built something beautiful that would last long after they were gone, a legacy of love that their children and grandchildren would carry forward into the future. That was their story, beginning in pain and fear but ending in joy and peace. A love story set in the wild west of Dakota Territory, where a damaged woman and a gentle cowboy found healing in each other's arms and built a life that proved love could conquer even the deepest scars.